Imagine stepping off of a stagecoach in a town where everyone looks at you like you're walking to your own funeral. You have 9 hungry children clinging to your skirts, 11 cents in your pocket, and a baby burning with fever in your arms. You answered a stranger's advertisement for a wife because it was your last hope on earth. But the moment you arrive, a woman approaches you with tears freezing on her face and whispers, "Oh dear Lord, have mercy on you." And then you learn the truth. The man you're about to marry, half the town believes he murdered his first wife. This is the story of Margaret Sullivan, a mother who walked into a killer's territory with nothing but her children and her courage. A woman who discovered that the most dangerous man in Montana wasn't her new husband, but the powerful judge who wanted them all dead. What she did next will leave you speechless. This story is a powerful reminder that a mother's love knows no limits. It's about finding strength when you have nothing left, choosing hope when the world gives you every reason to give up, and building a new life from the ashes of the old one. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? Margaret's arms shook as she held 3-year-old Bridget. 10 days with barely any food had left the child weak and hot with fever, a stark contrast to the bitter Montana cold. "This is it, Mama?" her oldest son Tommy asked, his voice barely a whisper against the wind. The sign read Copper Springs. This was the end of the line. Margaret's voice was a raw crackle. "Everybody out! Hold on to each other!" She counted them off the stagecoach, a line of thin, shivering children. Tommy, trying to be the man of the family at 15. Rosie, clutching their father's old handkerchief. Patrick, his coat far too small. The 7-year-old twins, Loss and Lucy. Then silent Colleen and little Samuel and Martha. 9 children, all still breathing. For now. A woman in a fine wool coat approached, tears freezing on her face. "Are you the one who answered Mr. Callahan's advertisement?" Margaret's heart pounded. "I am," the woman gasped. "Oh, dear Lord, have mercy on you." Just then a man's voice cut in. "That's enough, Esther." He was tall and broad, with a face like carved stone and a thin white scar along his jaw. But his eyes, they were the color of a winter storm, and they held a deep, terrible sadness. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm Nathaniel Callahan." He looked at her children. "You brought all 9. Margaret's chin lifted. "Was I supposed to leave some behind?" A flicker of pain crossed his face. "No, ma'am." Her daughter Rosie pulled at her sleeve. "Mama, why is everyone staring at us?" The townspeople watched from doorways and windows, their faces cold and unwelcoming. One man spat on the ground. Nate Callahan's voice was low and flat. "They aren't looking at you. They're looking at me." "Why?" Margaret asked. "Because some of them think I killed my wife." The words struck Margaret like a physical blow. Every part of her screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. She had 11 cents and a sick baby. "Did you?" she heard herself ask. Nate met her gaze without flinching. "No, ma'am, I did not." Just then a cry went up. "Mama, Colleen fell." Her 6-year-old lay crumpled in the snow, shaking. "The wagon's this way," Nate said, his voice suddenly urgent. "I have blankets and food. We need to get them warm." Margaret had no choice. She had never had a choice. "Lead the way." The wagon was sturdy, pulled by 2 horses that looked healthier than any of her children. "These aren't a poor farmer's horses," she said quietly. Nate's hands tightened on the reins, but he said nothing. "Your letter mentioned a simple life, a small farm," Margaret pressed. "You lied." Silence stretched between them as the children climbed into the wagon bed. Her son Tommy stood beside her, his hand near the old hunting knife at his belt. Margaret turned back to Nate. "If you have something to say it now. I've traveled 14 days. I have no time for games." He let out a long breath. "The ranch is bigger than I said, 1,200 acres. Margaret felt her heart stop. "And the house has 12 rooms. Mrs. Sullivan, I should have told you the truth. The last woman who knew what she was walking into. She did not survive it." "Your wife," Margaret whispered. "Catherine. She died 4 years ago in that house. And you tell me this now?" Margaret's voice rose, filled with desperation. "I'll give you money to go back." "Back to what?" she cried. "I have nothing. I have 9 children and a baby who might not see the morning. I have nothing but them." Nate was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a cloth bundle with bread, cheese, and dried meat. For the children, he said softly. It should hold them until we get home. Home. The word felt foreign. Margaret took the food and began dividing it among her children. You have to eat too, Ma, Tommy insisted, pressing a piece of bread into her hand. She ignored him. Mama, I'm cold, Bridget whispered, her small body radiating a dangerous heat. Margaret pulled the blankets tighter. We are almost there, baby. To our new home? Rosie asked, her voice older than her 12 years. Is Papa there? The question hung in the freezing air, a painful reminder of all they had lost and all they stood to lose. She looked at her 9 children, huddled together in the wagon. They were her only reason to keep breathing. Just then her son Patrick shouted, Ma, look! Margaret's heart stopped. Below them was not the simple ranch she expected. It was an empire, a massive house of timber and stone that seemed to own the whole valley. Smoke drifted from 2 chimneys, promising a warmth they desperately needed. That is not a farm, Tommy whispered beside her. Margaret knew he was right. The man had lied to them. As they drew closer, a silver-haired woman came out onto the porch. She was dressed simply, but her eyes were sharp and missed nothing. Nathaniel, she called out, you are late. Nate introduced Margaret. The woman, his Aunt Adelaide, looked past Margaret's worn coat to the wagon. Her eyes counted 1, 2, 3, up to 8 pale faces. 9, Adelaide said quietly. You brought 9 children. Margaret lifted her chin. Where I go, they go. Adelaide's gaze then settled on the sick baby in her arms. Bring her inside, Adelaide ordered. Bring all of them inside, now. The kitchen was huge, and a kind-faced woman named Martha was already serving hot soup. The children ate like they had not seen food in days. Margaret watched, her heart aching. There were no manners, only a desperate need to fill their empty bellies. When did they last have a proper meal? Adelaide asked her gently. 3 days ago, Margaret admitted. Adelaide's hand rested on her arm. Martha, she said, take the baby. Let us get her fever down. Margaret clutched Bridget tighter, but Adelaide's voice was firm. I have been where you are. You are about to collapse. Let us help you. With the baby in Martha's capable hands, Margaret finally ate. Later, she stood in the doorway of a warm room, watching all 9 of her children sleeping safely in real beds. For the first time in months, a small bit of hope returned. Just then, Nate appeared in the hallway. Mrs. Sullivan, he said quietly, we need to talk. They met in a large parlor with a crackling fire. Adelaide was already there, her face serious. Ask what you need to, Nate said. Your wife, Margaret began. What really happened to her? Nate's voice was strained. Childbirth. The doctor was no good, and help could not get through the snow. We lost them both, the baby too. Then why do folks say you did something wrong? Margaret pressed. Nate explained that his father had been a cruel man who stole land. Before she died, his wife Catherine had found papers. She found proof of all the terrible things his father had done, and she planned to expose everyone involved. And then she died, Nate finished, his voice bitter. It was mighty convenient for some powerful people, he'd said. The doctor who signed the papers left town right after. I do not know who to trust. He looked at Margaret, his eyes full of desperation. That is why I sent for you. I need an outsider. I need someone strong enough to help me find the truth and survive this place. All she cared about was giving her children a decent life. But now they were caught in a killer's web. If his wife was murdered in this house, my children are not safe, she told Nate. So you will tell me everything. Every last secret this place is hiding. I'll do whatever it takes to protect my family. Nate looked at her, his eyes filled with a heavy truth. For a long moment he just stared. Then he slowly gave a nod. Tomorrow, he promised, everything. That night, Margaret dreamed of her late husband, Daniel. He stood in a field of snow, warning her to be careful who she trusted. She woke with a jolt, her daughter's name a gasp on her lips. Bridget. She raced down the hall to the baby's room. The door was ajar. The little bed inside was empty. A terrible moan escaped her throat. No, not again. Not another loss. Then she heard a soft voice behind her. Mrs. Sullivan. Margaret spun around. It was Adelaide, standing in the hallway with Bridget resting safely in her arms. The baby's fever had finally broken. Margaret's legs gave out from under her, and she sank to the floor, sobbing with relief. Adelaide gently placed the warm, healthy child into her mother's arms. For the first time in a very long time, against all the fear and darkness, Margaret felt a small, stubborn flicker of hope. The next morning, the kitchen was filled with the sweet smell of real pancakes and the sound of her children's laughter. All 9 of them were there, safe and fed. It was a beautiful, simple sight. Adelaide appeared at her side. Nathaniel is waiting for you in the study. He is ready to tell you everything. Margaret's stomach tightened with resolve. She looked at her children one last time, ready to face whatever came next for their sake. Her oldest son, Tommy, gave her a firm nod. I'll watch them, Ma. She followed Adelaide to the study. Nate was there, holding an old leather folder. His face was grim. What I'm about to show you cannot leave this room, he said. My wife, Catherine, found this in the barn a few weeks before she died. It contains my father's real records, the ones he kept hidden from the world. The first page listed 12 names. Besides some, a single word was written: resolved. It meant those people were dead or had been driven from their land. My father hired men to do his dirty work, Nate explained, his voice hollow. They burned crops and poisoned wells. If that did not work, he paid a man, identified only by the initials JWW, to finish the job for good. Catherine was going to take this evidence to the federal marshal. The town doctor, a man named Whitfield, left town suddenly right after Catherine died. Nate was sure he had been paid to keep quiet, but his father was already gone by then. So who paid him? Nate pulled out one final sheet of paper. It was a payment receipt to JWW made just 3 weeks before Catherine's death. The signature at the bottom was not his father's. It belonged to Judge Cornelius Whitmore, his father's secret partner in crime. And he is still alive, lives in Copper Springs, in a big house on the hill. Nate gave a bitter laugh. I see him every Sunday at church. He shakes my hand and asks about the ranch. But this paper changes everything. It connects him directly to the killings, to Catherine. Someone has been watching this place. I have seen riders on the ridge. That is why I hired you. I need help before Whitmore makes his move. The door flew open. It was Tommy, breathing hard. Ma, there are men outside. 3 of them. They are asking for Mr. Callahan. Nate was already moving toward the front porch. 2 of the men looked like trouble. The third was different, with silver hair and an expensive coat. Mr. Callahan, the man said with a smile. Judge Whitmore. Nate's voice was flat. This is a surprise. Margaret's stomach turned to ice. This was him, the man who ordered Catherine Callahan's death. I heard you had a visitor. Whitmore's eyes landed on Margaret, a Mrs. Sullivan and her children. His eyes were cold. Another bride. You sure do go through them fast. Is there something I can help you with, Judge? Just a friendly visit. He stepped toward Margaret. And to welcome your new family. My condolences on your husband. It must be hard, raising 9 children all by yourself. I managed, she said. His eyes swept over her. Strong women always do. It is the weak ones who do not survive out here. A cold fear ran down Margaret's spine. Well, I will not keep you, Whitmore said, adjusting his gloves. I am sure you have business to discuss. Old papers, maybe. Nate's hand moved toward his belt. We are just settling in, he said. Of course, Whitmore said as he mounted his horse. Welcome to Copper Springs, Mrs. Sullivan. I surely hope you last longer than the previous one. He rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and dread. He knows, Margaret whispered. Yeah, Nate's face was pale. He knows. The next few days were tense. Margaret learned the ranch and got to know Adelaide, Nate's aunt. The old woman's mild manner hit a spine of steel. I was there when Catherine died, Adelaide told her one night. She was healthy as a horse until she started digging into James Whitmore's past. She got terrified in those last few weeks. She told me she found something that would ruin powerful men. 3 days later, she was gone. Did she say what it was? No. She said it was safer if I did not know. Adelaide gripped Margaret's hand. You and Nathaniel are in real danger. Cornelius Whitmore runs this whole territory. He has the law in his pocket and men who will kill for whiskey money. You think he will let you destroy that? He can try and stop us. He will try and try, and he might win, Adelaide warned. Catherine was strong and brave too, and now she is buried out back. What do you want me to do? Run? I want you to survive. Surviving is not enough, Margaret said, her jaw tight. That is not living. I told Nate I would help him find the truth. My children are in that house, and as long as Whitmore is out there, they are not safe. I am going to help bring that man down. Then I am going to raise my family in peace." Adelaide finally smiled. "Catherine would have liked you. Be careful, Margaret." The third morning, everything fell apart. Tommy ran into the kitchen. "Ma, a rider's coming in fast." It was one of Nate's ranch hands, Charlie. He nearly fell off his lathered horse. "Mr. Callahan," Charlie yelled, "the sheriff is coming. He has a warrant for your arrest. Says you murdered Catherine." The world seemed to stop. "On what grounds?" Nate's voice was dangerously calm. "A new witness," Charlie gasped. "Says they saw you threaten her the night she died." "It is a lie. Does not matter. They will be here in an hour." "Whitmore," Adelaide said. "He is stopping you from getting those papers out." "I know," Nate said. He knew he would never survive in that jail. "And leave you here with 9 kids to face Whitmore's men alone? I will not do it," Nate said, shaking his head. "This is for Catherine," Margaret pleaded. "It is about justice." Her son Tommy, his face pale but firm, stepped forward. "I will go. I can take the papers. I know how to ride." "No," Margaret said, "you are only 15 years old." Nate shook his head. "I will not send a child to do my job." "Then we all go together," Adelaide declared. Suddenly, hoofbeats echoed from the distance. Charlie's face went white. "They are here early." Margaret began shoving her children toward the house. "Inside now." The kids ran inside. Nate grabbed her arm. "Do not let them get me alone." 6 riders came over the hill. Sheriff Dawson led them, his tin star glinting. Behind him rode 4 deputies and Whitmore himself. "Nathaniel Callahan," the sheriff announced, "I have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of murder." "Murder of who?" Nate demanded. "Your wife, Catherine," Dawson replied flatly. "A new witness says you argued with her." "What witness?" The sheriff glanced at Whitmore. "That is confidential." "Convenient," Nate scoffed. Whitmore smiled his thin smile. "Now, Mr. Callahan, the sheriff is just doing his job. It is the law." Whitmore turned his cold gaze on her. "This does not concern you, Mrs. Sullivan." "It does when you are framing an innocent man," she shot back. "You are a poor widow with 9 children, he sneered. "Whatever lies Mr. Callahan told you will not protect you." "Is that a threat?" "It is a fact. Interfere with the law and you will face consequences." "Helping a killer has unfortunate results," Whitmore sneered. "Sheriff," Nate cut in, his voice steady, "there are papers in this house that prove Whitmore is a fraud and a killer. They show everything." He looked straight at the man. "Including the payment you signed right before Catherine died." The deputies shifted nervously. "He is lying," Whitmore yelled, his voice cracking. "Then let the sheriff search the house," Nate challenged. Whitmore's face was a mask of fury. "Sheriff!" he hissed. "Arrest him now!" Dawson hesitated, unable to meet Nate's eyes. "I do not have a choice." "Everyone has a choice," Nate replied quietly. Just then a tiny voice called out, "Mama?" Little Bridget, only 3 years old, stood on the porch holding her doll. As a deputy stepped forward, Margaret moved like lightning. "Touch her and I will kill you," she snarled. He froze. "Control yourself," Whitmore warned. "No one is threatening your children." "Then keep your men back." She swept Bridget into her arms, backing away. She faced them again. "Take him, but if he gets hurt, those papers go to Helena. I promise you that." Whitmore gave a cold smile. "Fine, Sheriff, arrest him. Leave 2 men here to keep Mrs. Sullivan and her family safe." The threat was clear as day. "Safe?" she spat. As 2 deputies moved toward the house, she knew they were trapped. Dawson brought out the shackles. Nate gave her arm a squeeze. "It will be all right," he murmured, though his eyes were full of fear. "Watch the children." Nate pressed a small metal key into Margaret's palm. "The 3rd brick from the left in the study fireplace. It opens from the back. Promise me, Margaret. Get those papers to Helena. Promise me Catherine did not die for nothing." "I promise," she whispered through tears. They took him. Margaret stood on the porch holding Bridget and watched them put Nathaniel Callahan in shackles. Whitmore tipped his hat in a cruel goodbye. 2 deputies stayed behind watching the house. "Ma," Tommy asked, "what do we do now?" Margaret looked at the key. "We wait," she said, "and then we fight." That evening, with his key from Nate burning in her palm, Margaret waited. Once the house was still, she crept into the dark study. She found the loose brick in the fireplace and pulled out a heavy satchel of papers. It was all there. Enough evidence to destroy the judge, but also enough to get her and her children killed if she was caught. As she stood there, her heart pounding, a voice came from the doorway. "Way, Ma." It was Tommy. He stood there, fully dressed, with his father's knife at his belt. "I figured you would go for those papers tonight," he said. "Don't tell me I'm too young, Ma. Pa is gone, and Mr. Callahan is in jail. Those men outside are not just going to let us leave. I know what is at stake. Let me help." Margaret looked at her boy, who had grown into a man far too quickly. "All right," she said, her voice tight with emotion as she held out the satchel. "We make a plan together. These papers have to reach the federal marshal in Helena. It's a hard 3-day ride, and Whitmore's men are watching the main road." Adelaide mentioned an old mining trail through the mountains. "I can take it." "Thomas, no." Margaret's voice was firm. "I am not sending you into those mountains alone in winter." "Then who else is there? You cannot go. The little ones need you. Let me do this, Ma. Let me use what you and Pa taught me." Margaret hesitated, every part of her wanting to say no, but he was right. There was no other way. "All right, you ride straight there. You do not stop for anyone. You do not trust anyone. You just get those papers to the marshal. And if you are caught, those papers disappear. Burn them, sink them, whatever it takes. Judge Whitmore can never get his hands on them." "I understand, Ma." He hugged her, a fierce and quick embrace. Just then, Adelaide appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "The deputies are changing their watch. You have maybe 10 minutes while the barn is unguarded." She pushed a map into his hand. "Follow this trail exactly. One wrong turn, and those mountains will keep you forever. The gray mare is fastest, and she knows the trails." Margaret walked with him into the shadows. The cold was brutal, the kind that could kill a man who was not prepared. She watched him melt into the darkness, a ghost moving toward the barn. Then she went back into it to get ready for the war she knew was coming. The trouble began at dawn. A shout from outside was followed by heavy boots pounding on the porch. The door crashed open. Deputy Harrison, a man with mean little eyes and a cruel mouth, stood there, his hand resting on his gun. "Where is the boy?" he snarled. "Tommy? He is not in his bed. A horse is gone from the barn." "What about it?" Margaret shrugged, keeping her voice level. "Boys his age can be foolish." Harrison's face twisted as he grabbed her arm, yanking her close. "Do not play dumb with me. Judge Whitmore gave orders that nobody leaves this ranch." A small voice cut through the tension. "Get your hands off my mother." It was 9-year-old Patrick, standing skinny but tall in the doorway. Harrison shoved Margaret away from him. "This is not over." When Harrison had stormed off, Margaret finally let out a shaky breath. Her composure returned as Adelaide entered the kitchen. "He is riding to town to tell Whitmore." Margaret nodded. "I figured. That gives us maybe 2 hours before this place is crawling with his men." The children watched, their eyes wide with fear. "What are we going to do?" Margaret's voice was like steel. "We hold on. We do whatever it takes. We hold on until Tommy reaches Helena." Those 2 hours felt like 2 years. Then through the edge of the curtain, Margaret saw them. At least a dozen riders were coming over the ridge, with Judge Whitmore himself at the front. Her voice was quiet but urgent. "Adelaide, take the children to the cellar." Now she knelt in front of Patrick, gripping his small shoulders. "I need you to be brave. You keep your brothers and sisters safe and quiet. Do not come out until I come and get you." He trembled but nodded. She watched them go, then closed the heavy cellar door and turned to face the front of the house alone. Judge Whitmore got off his horse slowly. Margaret stepped onto the porch. "Mrs. Sullivan." His voice was smooth as silk. "We need to have a talk. Then talk from there. You are not coming inside my house." "Your house?" Whitmore laughed, a cold and ugly sound. "This house belongs to a man sitting in jail for murder. You have no claim to anything here." "I have 9 children who live in this house," she said. "That is claim enough." 8 children, actually," Whitmore corrected, his smile turning sharp. "Unless you want to tell me where the 9th one is. I believe young Thomas is riding north, carrying some papers that do not belong to him." His voice dropped. "My men are already tracking him in those mountains. They will find him." "If you hurt my son, I do not want to hurt anyone," Whitmore said, stepping onto the porch. "I just want the papers. Call off your boy, and you can take your children and leave this territory for good. And tell me where your son is, or my men will stop being polite." He left Margaret shaking on her porch, her heart pounding in her chest. She had 1 hour. She used it to get ready. Margaret pulled Daniel's old rifle from a hidden spot in the cellar. She showed her daughter Adelaide where the bullets were, wrote a quick letter to her children, and prayed for her boy Tommy, lost in the mountains. The hour was up. Judge Whitmore and his men spread out around her house like a pack of hungry wolves ready to tear her family apart. This story is about a mother's fierce love and how courage can take down even the most powerful tyrant. This time, Whitmore brought the town sheriff, a man so pale and shaky, he looked like he was about to do something he would regret for the rest of his life. "Time is up, Mrs. Sullivan." Margaret opened the door just a crack, holding the rifle low. "I have got nothing for you." Whitmore nodded to his men. "Find the papers. Find the children. If you touch my children, I will kill every last one of you." The men stopped. They were 4 armed men, and she was just one woman with an old gun. The first man took a step forward. A shot rang out, but it did not come from Margaret's rifle. The man grabbed his arm, blood leaking through his fingers. The voice came from the second-floor window. "Get off this land before the next bullet finds a home between your eyes." It was Adelaide, her daughter, holding a hunting rifle. "You are making a big mistake," Whitmore snarled. "My only mistake was staying silent for 30 years, she called back. Just then a rider galloped toward them. "Sir, riders are coming from the north. At least 20 of them." "What? They look like federal marshals, sir." Margaret's heart just about stopped. How could that be? It was impossible. But there they were. At the head of the group was a U.S. Marshal, and right beside him, looking tired but determined, was her son, Tommy. "Ma," he cried out, "I made it." The lead marshal dismounted. "I am Marshal Crawford. Your boy found us on the trail. We were already headed this way. We got a telegram 3 days ago, an anonymous tip about a crooked judge and the suspicious death of a woman named Catherine Callahan." Margaret's legs went weak, and she sat down hard on the porch steps. Tommy rushed to her side. "Ma, they were already coming for him," and someone from inside Whitmore's own circle turned on him. Margaret's eyes drifted to Sheriff Dawson, who stood frozen, looking as white as a ghost. Marshal Crawford faced the judge. "I believe we have some business to discuss, Judge Whitmore. We have evidence tying you to fraud, extortion, and the murder of Catherine Callahan." "That is ridiculous. Everyone knows her husband killed her. Everyone knows the story you paid them to believe," Crawford said, his voice hard as iron. "We have payment, records, and witnesses. You are finished." In that moment, Whitmore was no longer a powerful judge. He was just a small, wicked man whose whole world was falling apart. "You cannot do this," he shrieked. Marshal Crawford simply nodded to his men. "Take him." Whitmore reached for his gun, but Margaret had her rifle up and pointed right at his heart. "Do not even think about it. You have caused enough pain." His shoulders slumped, and they put him in chains. It was finally over. Margaret turned to her children, who were waiting in the cellar. 8 scared faces looked up from the darkness. "It is all over," she said softly. "You can come out now." Her youngest, Bridget, wrapped her arms around her neck. "I was so scared, Mama." "I know, baby, but you were so brave. All of you were so brave." Her other children gathered around, clinging to her side. There was just one more thing. "What about Mr. Callahan?" she asked the marshal, her heart tight with worry. "We already sent men to release him," Crawford said with a kind smile. "He should be here in about an hour." And as the sun began to set, Nate Callahan rode into the yard, bruised but free. Margaret ran to him, and he wrapped her in a hug so tight she could barely breathe. "I thought I had lost you," he whispered. "You did it, Margaret. You saved us all." "No," she said, looking at her son. "Tommy did it. He saved us." She was laughing and crying all at once. "He did it." Then she said it. "Our boy." The words just hung there in the air. Margaret's face went hot. "I did not mean—" But Nate gently touched her face. "Please do not take it back." He sounded broken down. "I know this is fast. I know we started out on a lie, but, Margaret, locked in that jail cell, all I could think was that I wanted a chance to make this real." "Make what real?" he asked. "Us," he said, his eyes begging her to understand. A family. I am not asking you now, just for a chance. She thought of Daniel, her husband of 20 years, and the life they had. Then she looked at Nate, a good man who had risked it all to fix his father's mistakes. He saw her 9 children as a blessing, not a burden, and now he was just asking for a chance to belong. You will have to earn it, she told him. I know, he said. Every single day. I do not need a hero, Nate. I need a partner to stand with me. I can do that. And my children always come first. They should, Nate smiled, and this time the smile was real, just like their mother. Margaret leaned in and kissed him. It was a soft kiss, 2 hurt people finding each other. But it felt real. It was a start. Just then, little Bridget came running full tilt across the snowy yard. Nate swung her up into his arms. Well, hey there, little bit. Mama said the bad men are gone, she chirped. She is right. They are gone for good. Bridget hugged his neck tight. Good. I do not like bad men. Me neither, sweetheart. The rest of the children started coming out of the house. Tommy was in the lead, with Rosie and the others trailing behind. All 9 of them made a half circle around Nate and Margaret. Kids, Margaret said, her voice strong, I reckon it is time for a family meeting. About what? Patrick wanted to know. About what we do now. She looked at each of them, her whole world right there. Mr. Callahan has asked us to stay, Margaret said, to make this our real home. What do you want, Mama? Tommy asked. She smiled. I want to stop running. I want to build a life, not just get by. I want y'all to have the life your father dreamed of for you. She took Nate's hand. And I think we can do that right here. It was quiet for a second, then Patrick piped up. Does this mean I can keep working with the horses? A laugh, full of surprise and relief, bubbled out of Margaret. Yes, son, it sure does. Well, I am in then. One after another, they all agreed. Even quiet Colleen gave a little nod. Tommy was the last one. He looked Nate square in the eye. You heard my mama. You step out of line, and that Whitmore fellow will look like a saint compared to me. Fair enough, Nate said. Tommy nodded back. Then welcome to the family, sir. Standing in that cold yard, surrounded by her children, Margaret finally let herself feel it. They were home. That peace lasted for 3 whole days. 3 days of watching her kids laugh without a shadow of fear. She almost believed the nightmare was over. Then Marshal Crawford rode up with news that froze her blood. Whitmore is gone. What? Broke out of the federal jail in Helena last night. Somebody helped him, killed 2 guards on his way out. How is that possible? He was supposed to be watched every second. Money can buy a lot of things, Mrs. Sullivan. Crawford looked bone-tired. We have got men on his trail, but with this weather, he is coming here, Nate said, his voice flat. He is coming for us. We do not know that for sure. I know it, Nate insisted. Whitmore does not run away. He gets even. We took everything from him. He will not rest until he makes us pay for it. Margaret thought of her children, finally sleeping soundly in their beds. How much time do we have? A day, maybe less, if he is riding hard. I can leave 4 of my men here, Crawford offered. It might not be enough. It is not enough, Nate said, shaking his head. Whitmore knows this land. He has got places to hide and people who will help him. 4 men will not stop him. Then what do you aim to do? Nate was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Margaret, his eyes full of steel. We do not wait for him. We go after him. Nate, he is desperate and hurt. That makes him dangerous, Nate countered. But it also makes him careless. I know where he would go. A cabin up in the mountains his family used to own. You want to chase a killer into the mountains? I want to end this for good. And what if you get killed? Margaret stepped right up to him and grabbed his arm. You listen to me, Nathaniel Callahan. I have been through too much to watch you go on some fool's errand and not come back. We will do this together, or we will not do it at all. You cannot come. The children, Adelaide can watch them, Margaret said, her jaw set tight. I stood up to Whitmore's men with a rifle. Do not you dare tell me what I cannot handle. Nate just looked at her for a long second. He did not argue. He just nodded. Together, then. Crawford cleared his throat. Well, if you are serious, we need to ride out now. Every hour we waste is another hour he gets away. Give us 10 minutes, Margaret said, already turning toward the house. I have to talk to my children. They were all in the kitchen, The second Tommy saw her face, he knew. What is it? Whitmore got out. The room went dead silent. Is he coming here? Rosie asked, her face pale. We do not know, Margaret said, kneeling down to hug the little ones. But we are not waiting around to find out. Mr. Callahan and I are going after him. Marshal Crawford's men will be here to keep you safe. No, Ma, you cannot. Tommy was on his feet, his voice cracking. You cannot leave us again. What if you do not come back? Her heart just broke. She thought of how much she had asked of him, how much weight he had carried. Come here, she whispered. He hesitated, then rushed into her arms and let him hold her tight. I am coming back, she whispered into his hair. I promise. But that man is out there, and none of us are safe until he is caught. Not you, not your brothers and sisters, nobody. Then let me go with you. No, Thomas, you are needed here. She held him by the shoulders, looking him in the eye. Adelaide is strong, but she is not young. And the marshals do not know these children the way you do. I will protect them, he vowed. I know you will, she said, her hand on his cheek. That is why I am trusting you. You are the bravest person I know. Braver than me and braver than your father. Tommy's eyes were wet, but at 15 he was too old to cry. Bring Mr. Callahan back too, he said quietly. I will. She said goodbye to each of them. Rosie hugged her and whispered, Be careful, Ma. Patrick told her to shoot that bad man if she got the chance. The twins just clung to her. Samuel gave her his lucky rock. Martha gave her a wet kiss. Colleen, who had not spoken in days, finally said, I love you, Mama. And little Bridget, who was just scared, got a final promise. Mama is coming back, baby, always. She kissed the child's forehead, handed her to Rosie, and walked out of that kitchen. She did not look back. If she looked back, she knew she would never leave. Within the hour, they were gone. Margaret, Nate, Marshal Crawford, and 2 deputies. 5 riders chasing a killer into the mountains. The trail was slick with ice and full of dangerous drops. But Nate knew the way and he pushed them hard. Whitmore will be traveling alone, Nate said. He never trusted anyone enough to show them that cabin. It is his secret hiding place. Then how do you know about it, Catherine? Nate's late wife had found it mentioned in his papers. Nate's jaw was tight. She wanted to go there to see what he was hiding. I told her it was too dangerous. The week she died, she told me she had a plan. She said she had found something that would finish Whitmore for good. Margaret thought about that. You think whatever she found is still at the cabin? It is possible, Nate replied. Whitmore never went back after she died. He was probably scared of what she might have left behind. If there is more proof of what he has done, it could be there. Or, Margaret added, it could be a trap. That is also possible. Crawford rode up beside them. We are about an hour away. The cabin is in a valley with its back to a cliff. One way in, one way out. Nate laid out the problem. If Whitmore is there, he will see us coming. There is no way to surprise him. So what is the plan? We do not need to surprise him. We need to draw him out. Nate looked straight at Margaret, and I know just how to do it. How? By giving him exactly what he wants. Me. Margaret immediately shot the idea down. Absolutely not. You are not using yourself as bait. It is the only way, Nate insisted. Whitmore wants revenge. He wants to see me suffer. If I ride in there all by myself, he will not be able to resist coming out. And then he shoots you and rides away. No. Then you and Crawford come in from the sides while his attention is on me. Nate's voice softened. I am not trying to be a hero. I am trying to end this. You are trying to get yourself killed. It is a calculated risk, he said, taking her hand. I have spent 4 years living in fear of that man, fear of losing anyone else. I am done being afraid. Margaret wanted to argue. Every part of her screamed to protect the man she was starting to love. But she saw the look in his eyes. He had to face this himself. If he kills you, she said, her voice barely a whisper, I will never forgive you. Then I suppose I had better not get killed. The cabin finally came into view as the sun was setting. It was a small, weathered building hunched against a cliff. A thin line of smoke came from its chimney. He is here, Crawford whispered. Everyone get in position. Margaret, you take the east. Henderson, the west. I will cover the north. And me? Nate asked. You ride in and draw him out, Crawford said, his face grim. and try not to die. Nate swung down from his horse. He turned to Margaret. Whatever happens, she grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him close. Do not say goodbye. You ride in there. You do what you have to do, and you come back to me. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. She gave him a hard, desperate kiss that said everything she could not put into words. Then she let him go. Nate rode toward the cabin by himself. Margaret watched from behind some rocks, her rifle steady, her heart pounding in her chest. She saw Nate get closer and closer. Whitmore! Nate's voice echoed in the valley. Cornelius Whitmore, I know you are in there. Come out and face me. There was only silence. You wanted your revenge? Well, here I am. No marshals, just me. The cabin door slowly creaked open. The man who stepped out was a wreck. Whitmore's fancy clothes were torn, and his silver hair was a mess, but the gun in his hand was steady. Nathaniel, he rasped. You came. I came. Do you have any idea what you have cost me? Nate's voice was like stone. I know what I destroyed. An empire that was built on blood and lies. You ruined families. You took lives. You deserved worse than this. I deserved... Whitmore let out a broken laugh. I brought law to this territory. I built this place from nothing. You murdered innocent people to do it. I made necessary sacrifices, Whitmore yelled. Sacrifices for progress. And now it is all gone because of you and that nosy wife of yours. Catherine was right to expose you. Catherine was a fool. Whitmore's voice cracked with rage. She could have looked the other way, enjoyed the life I gave her. Instead, she chose to dig up secrets that should have stayed buried. So you killed her. I did what had to be done, Whitmore confessed, the words spilling out of him. She was going to destroy everything. She found the proof, all of it. It is hidden right here in this cabin. Letters, account books, everything. She was going to take it all to the federal government. Margaret froze. The evidence. It was still here. The doctor, Nate said slowly, Dr. Whitfield. He was supposed to make her death look natural. That drunken fool botched the whole thing. Whitmore spat on the ground. I had to pay him a fortune just to disappear. And the baby? Whitmore flinched just for a second, but Margaret saw it. That was not... I did not want that. He tried to compose himself. It was collateral damage. Unfortunate, but it could not be avoided. You murdered a child. I eliminated a threat. Whitmore's composure was gone now. Do you understand what she would have destroyed? 30 years of work, 30 years of building something. Something rotten, Nate said. Something evil. Something necessary. Whitmore raised his gun and aimed it at Nate's chest. And you are just like her. You cannot leave things alone. You do not understand that some secrets need to stay buried. You are done, Whitmore. Even if you kill me, the marshals have enough. The marshals have copies, Whitmore sneered. But the real proof, it is still here, hidden. And when I am gone, it will stay hidden forever. Then tell me where it is. Tell? Why in the world would I do that? Because you are going to die here today. Cornelius, Nate's voice was calm. We both know it. There is nowhere left to run. This is the end for you. So why should I make it easy on you? Because Catherine deserves justice. The families you destroyed deserve justice. The truth deserves to come out. Nate took a step forward. You can die as a monster, remembered for nothing but your crimes. Or you can do one decent thing, one single act of redemption. Whitmore's gun hand trembled. For a second, Margaret thought he might actually do it, that he might choose a moment of conscience over his own ego. But then his face hardened into a mask of pure hate. Redemption is for fools, he snarled. And then he fired. Margaret screamed, but Nate was already diving to the side as the bullet flew past him. He hit the ground and rolled, drawing his own pistol. A second shot cracked through the air, but it came from Marshal Crawford. It caught Whitmore in the shoulder. The judge stumbled and fell. Margaret was already running before she even knew she had moved. Her world focused on one thing: getting to Nate. I am fine, Nate said as Margaret ran to him. She checked him over, then looked down at Whitmore, who was groaning in the snow, his shoulder bleeding bad. Finish it, Whitmore snarled. Go on, you coward. No, Nate said, putting his gun away. You are going to trial. Everyone is going to see you for what you are. A trial? Whitmore laughed, spitting blood. You think that fixes anything? I think it is a start, Nate said. Crawford and his deputies came and grabbed Whitmore. As they pulled him up, his hateful eyes found Margaret. You, he hissed. This is all because of you and your brats. If I had never come here, Margaret's voice was like ice. You would still be hurting people. I am glad I came, and I am glad I got to stop you. Get him out of my sight, Nate said, turning his back on the disgraced judge. As they dragged Whitmore away, Nate looked at the small cabin. He hid the evidence in there, all the papers Catherine found. He was proud of it, proud he thought he could beat us even now. It took them 2 long hours of searching. Behind the fireplace, Margaret found it, a locked, rusted metal box. This is it, Nate said, taking the box in his hands. This is what Catherine died for. He broke the lock, and inside lay the proof that would ensure Judge Whitmore would never hurt another family again. But Tommy was already high in the mountains, his horse climbing steadily. In his saddlebag, wrapped in oilcloth, was everything that mattered. It was a complete record of 30 years of Judge Whitmore's corruption, with ledgers, maps, and proof of murder. At the very bottom of the stack was a single letter, addressed to Nate, the man Whitmore had framed for his own crimes. It was from the woman Nate had loved, written the night before Whitmore had her killed. It was her final request for Nate to finish what she started, to expose the truth, and to make sure justice was finally done. She knew I could fix this. Nate pulled her in close. And you did. We did. I could not have done it without you. Without your fight. She smiled. I had 9 good reasons to fight. Nate let out a real laugh, full of relief. Let's go home, he said. Our family. Margaret held on to that word. Yes, let's go home. The ride back was quiet. They were worn out, hurt in ways that did not bleed. But with every mile, Margaret felt lighter. The truth was out, and Whitmore was caught. When she saw the ranch, her heart just about burst. Mama, they are back, Patrick's voice rang out, followed by the sound of running feet. All 9 of them came pouring out of the house. Margaret was hardly off her horse before they surrounded her. We were so worried. Is the bad man gone? I was scared, Mama. She hugged as many as she could, kissing their heads and making sure they were all safe. They were hers. We caught him, she finally said. He is gone. He is never going to hurt anyone again. Tommy stood back from the others. Margaret made her way over to him. Are you okay? He nodded, his voice thick. Just glad you are back. Me too. She hugged her oldest son tight. I am so proud of you, Thomas. You kept them safe. That is everything. For just a second, Tommy let himself be a boy again. I love you, Ma. I love you too, baby. Adelaide was on the porch, tears on her face. Thank God. Nate hugged his aunt. It is over, Addie. We found everything, he said softly. She left me a letter. Adelaide covered her mouth. She knew. Nate swallowed hard. She wanted us to finish what she started. And we will. We are going to make things right for every family my father and Whitmore destroyed. Margaret watched them. This broken family was finally becoming whole. That night, Margaret and Nate sat on the porch. I have been thinking about what is next, Nate said. This trial will be long and hard. I can handle hard. He took her hand. I know you can, but I am committed to this, to you and to these children. It is going to take the rest of our lives to fix what my father did. She squeezed his hand. Then we had better get started. You really mean that? I do. I came here just looking for a way to survive, Nate. I found a home. I found a family. I have never wanted easy, Nathaniel Callahan. I wanted real. And this, us, is the realest thing I have felt in a long time. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, worn silver ring. This was my mother's, he said. Nate's voice was shaky. I know this is soon, but Margaret Sullivan, I love you. I love your strength, and I love your children like they are my own. I want to spend my life earning the right to be your husband. Are you asking me to marry you? Tears were running down her face. I am asking you to think about it. He placed the ring in her hand. No pressure. Just a promise that whatever comes next, we face it together. Margaret looked at the ring. She thought about Daniel, her husband of 20 years. Then she thought about Nate, a good man who had fought through his own pain. He saw her 9 children as a gift, not a burden. She knew what Daniel would want for them. Yes, she said. Nate stared at her. What? Yes, I will marry you. She put the ring on her finger. Not because I am replacing Daniel, but because I found something new. I have conditions, though. Anything. We take it slow. The children need time. Done. No more secrets. You talk to me. Done. And you let me fight my own battles. I am your partner. Nate gave her that real smile she was starting to love. I would not have it any other way. She leaned in and kissed him. For the first time in a long time, Margaret Sullivan allowed herself to believe in tomorrow. The trial began on a cold February morning. Margaret sat in the front row of the courthouse, her 9 children beside her, all dressed in their best. They sat as still as they could, her 9 reasons for everything. All rise. A federal judge from Washington entered the room. Whitmore was led in wearing chains. He looked smaller now, and his hair had turned white, but his eyes were still full of hate when he looked at her. Margaret held his gaze. The United States versus Cornelius James Whitmore. The charges were read aloud. 17 counts of murder, 43 counts of fraud, and 12 counts of extortion. 17 murders. The words hit Margaret in the gut. How does the defendant plead? Not guilty, Your Honor, his lawyer said. The prosecutor stood up. Your Honor, we will prove that Cornelius Whitmore used his power to destroy innocent families for 30 years. We will prove he ordered murders and corrupted the justice system, and that his last victim was Catherine Callahan, a woman whose only crime was finding out the truth. The prosecution called its first witness, Nathaniel Callahan. Nate stood, squeezed his wife Margaret's hand, and walked to the stand. Once he was sworn in, he looked right at the man on trial. Mr. Callahan, can you tell the court about the defendant? He was my father's business partner. He was also the man who arranged for my wife to be murdered. The courtroom exploded into noise. The judge slammed his gavel. Order in this court. When things quieted down, the prosecutor continued. Can you explain that, Mr. Callahan? My wife Catherine found proof that Whitmore and my father were mixed up in fraud and murder. She was getting ready to hand that proof over to the federal authorities. Nate's voice was firm, but Margaret saw his hand shake. 3 weeks before she could leave, she died. They said it was from childbirth, but it was poison. Do you have proof of this? I have a receipt for the payment made to Doe, the doctor who attended my wife. It was signed by Cornelius Whitmore. I have the word of Silas Crenshaw, the man paid to make sure the doctor did as he was told. And I have letters from Whitmore to my father, discussing the need to silence anyone who threatened them. For the next 2 hours, Nate laid out the whole ugly story. Every document, every payment, and every death pointed straight back to Whitmore. By the time he finished, the courtroom was in a stunned silence. As Nate stepped down, Margaret saw tears on his mother Adelaide's face. The prosecution calls Margaret Sullivan. Margaret's heart pounded as she walked to the witness stand. The prosecutor smiled gently. Mrs. Sullivan, can you tell us what happened when you arrived at the Callahan Ranch? I came there as a mail-order bride. I was a widow with 9 children, just looking for a safe place to land. What I found was a house full of secrets, in a town run by a monster. 3 days after I got there, he showed up. He told Mr. Callahan to sell the ranch or there would be trouble. When Mr. Callahan refused, Whitmore had him thrown in jail on made-up charges. Then he sent his men to watch us, to make sure we couldn't get the evidence out. And what happened next? My son, who was only 15, rode through a blizzard to get help from the federal marshals. He almost died out there. Margaret's voice broke with pride. He did what grown men were too scared to do. He brought the truth out. And when Whitmore escaped jail, he came back to our home to kill us all. Margaret stared directly at Whitmore. He admitted to me, to my face, that he killed Catherine Callahan and her baby. He said it was just business. The courtroom erupted all over again. The trial lasted for 2 weeks. One witness after another took the stand. There were families who had lost everything because of Whitmore's schemes. There were old partners he had threatened. Finally, Silas Crenshaw, the hired killer, took the stand. He decided talking was better than hanging. He paid me $500 for each problem I took care of, Crenshaw said. The doctor was an extra $1,000 to make sure Mrs. Callahan didn't survive giving birth. The baby wasn't supposed to die, but the doctor was drunk and gave her the wrong amount. Whitmore didn't care. He said it was cleaner that way. I am willing to testify to anything, Crenshaw said, if it keeps a rope from around my neck. Besides, his eyes found Whitmore. he would have killed me sooner or later. He got rid of everyone who knew too much. The jury took less than 4 hours. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood, his face grim. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. The word echoed in the silence. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On all remaining charges, guilty on all counts, Your Honor. Whitmore's face turned white. His eyes locked on Margaret from across the room, and she saw pure murderous rage. You, he hissed. You and your brats did this. You ruined everything. The judge banged his gavel. The defendant will be silent. I will see you in hell, Margaret Sullivan. The bailiffs dragged him out of the room, still screaming threats at her. Patrick, her son, whispered, Ma, is he going to hurt us? No, baby. She pulled him into a hug. He is never going to hurt anyone ever again. The judge cleared his throat. The defendant is hereby sentenced to death by hanging. The execution will take place in 30 days. He banged his gavel one last time. This court is adjourned. 30 days. For 30 days, Margaret and her children learned how to breathe again. Tommy worked hard on the ranch, the worry finally leaving his shoulders. Rosie started writing stories again, dreaming of a future she could believe in. Patrick discovered he had a natural way with horses. Even little Colleen started to speak again. And Bridget, who had been so frail when they arrived, grew strong and loud and wonderfully impossible. She came running into the kitchen one morning, her dress already covered in dust, shouting, Mama, I am hungry. And for the first time in a very long time, Margaret just laughed. Mama, can I go help Mr. Nate with the horses? Please? Did you eat all your breakfast, darling? Yes, ma'am. And did you run a brush through that hair? Bridget's hands shot up to her wild curls. Oh, I forgot. Well, no horses till you do. But Mama, go on now. Bridget stomped off and Adelaide chuckled from the doorway. That little one's getting feistier by the day. Tell me about it. Margaret sighed. She'll be running this whole ranch soon. Adelaide smiled. Say, Nate sent me to find you. He's down at the chapel and wants to show you something. Margaret's heart gave a little jump. At the chapel, she found Nate with his back to her, his shoulders tight. Nate? He turned, his face wet with tears. What is it? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. He scrubbed at his eyes. I was just saying goodbye. Margaret stood beside him, looking through the window at the memorial for his late wife, Catherine. I'm saying goodbye to all the guilt, he said, his voice thick. All the fear. I've carried it for 4 long years, and I'm finally ready to put it down. He turned and took her hands. Margaret, I want to build a new life with you, with our kids. We already are, Nate, I know, but I need to do more. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I've been meeting with lawyers. I'm giving back the land my father stole from 12 different families, every last acre. Margaret was stunned. Nate, that's almost half the ranch. I know, but it's the right thing to do. I won't build our future on stolen ground. I don't want our children, your children, and maybe someday our children, growing up in that shadow. The words our children settled warm in her heart. You're a good man, Nathaniel Callahan. I'm trying my best. Will you help me? Always. They just stood there, 2 people healing together. The telegram came on a gray March morning. Whitmore was gone. Margaret gathered the children and told them plainly, the bad man can't hurt us anymore. Her son Patrick spoke first. Good. He was an evil man, Ma. He deserved it. Seeing the hardness in her 9-year-old boy's eyes made her heart ache. Maybe so, son, but being glad a man is dead is a heavy burden. Don't let it make you hard inside. Is it wrong that I'm relieved? No, darling. Being relieved that we're safe is not the same as celebrating. You see the difference? Patrick nodded. Later, Rosie cleared her throat. Ma, can we talk about your wedding? Adelaide says you still haven't picked a date. That Adelaide talks too much. She says you're being stubborn. I'm being practical, with the ranch and all. Ma, Tommy cut in, you're just making excuses. We know you're scared. I am not scared. Then pick a day. Margaret looked at the faces of her children, all watching her. Y'all have been talking behind my back. We've been worried, Rosie said gently. You deserve to be happy, Ma. And Mr. Nate, he makes you happy. So just marry him already. Marry him, marry him. Bridget started the chant, and soon all the children joined in. All right, fine. Margaret threw up her hands, laughing. I'll talk to him tonight. Promise, I promise. That evening, she found Nate in the barn. The children have officially staged a mutiny. What? They say I'm dragging my feet on our wedding. Said I was stubborn and scared. Are you? Probably. Nate put down his brush and walked over, taking her hands in his. Margaret, we don't have to do a thing till you're ready, I know. She looked at their joined hands. It's not about being ready, it's about what? It's about wondering if I deserve it. Her voice was barely a whisper. 10 months ago, I was watching my children were starving. I sold off everything we had just to feed them. I was so desperate I answered a stranger's ad for a wife. And now I have a home, a family, a good man. Her voice broke, and I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Good things do not happen to people like me. Nate, I lost Daniel, our home, everything. What if I lose you too? Nate pulled her in tight. Margaret Sullivan, you listen to me. You are the strongest woman I have ever known. You crossed this land with 9 kids and 11 cents. You saved my life and this ranch. You deserve every good thing, and I will spend my life proving it to you. He held her face in his hands. Marry me, Margaret. Not for the children, not because it makes sense. Marry me because you love me and I love you. That is more than enough. She looked into his eyes, which were finally full of hope. April, she said, when the snow is gone and the flowers are out. I want to get married in April. Nate gave her the biggest smile she had ever seen. April it is. The wedding was on a perfect spring morning. Margaret wore a simple white dress Adelaide helped make. Tommy, standing tall and proud, walked her down the aisle. Rosie was her maid of honor, and Patrick stood beside Nate as his best man. The twins threw petals while Samuel carried the rings. All 9 children watched as their mother started her new life. Dearly beloved, the preacher began, we are here to join Nathaniel James Callahan and Margaret Ellen Sullivan. Margaret saw her family all around her, her children, Adelaide, Marshall Crawford, and the ranch hands. Her real family. Do you, Nathaniel, take this woman to be your wife? I do. And do you, Margaret, take this man to be your husband? She looked at Nate. This man had seen her at her worst and found her strength. He had looked at 9 hungry children and saw a family. I do. Then I pronounce you husband and wife. The preacher smiled. You may kiss the bride. Nate kissed her as the children cheered. I love you, Mrs. Callahan, he whispered. I love you too, Mr. Callahan. For the first time in years, Margaret believed everything would be all right. The celebration went on late into the night with food, music, and dancing. She watched Tommy waltz with Rosie and Patrick, spin the little ones until they were dizzy. Even Bridget danced with everyone she could find. Ma, Tommy said, his face flushed with joy. This is the best day. He hesitated. Pa would have liked him. Mr. Callahan, I mean. Pa always said he just wanted you to be happy. You are happy now, are you not? I am, baby. Truly happy. Good. He gave her a quick, fierce hug. Nate's arms slid around her waist. A penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Callahan. She leaned back against his chest. I was just thinking about how far we have come. I am not worried about the future. I am just here in this moment with you and my children. That is a good place to be. Nate took her hand. Come on, I want to show you something. He led her up a small hill behind the house. Look, the ranch spread out below them, lit by lanterns and the moon. Their home, their future. A year ago, Nate said quietly, I stood right here and thought about ending it all. The loneliness was just too much. So I wrote that advertisement. One last desperate hope. He turned to her, his eyes glistening. And you answered. You and 9 scared, hungry, but brave children. You walked into my broken life and made it whole. We made it whole together, she corrected. Together. He smiled. I like that word. You better get used to it, Mr. Callahan. You are stuck with us now. Good. He pulled her close. I do not ever want to be unstuck. They stood on that hill, 2 people who had found each other against all odds. Margaret finally understood something she had long forgotten. Happiness is not something you wait for. It is something you choose. She chose to answer an ad. She chose to cross a territory. She chose to fight. She chose to love. And now she was choosing this life, this man, this family. Ma, come quick! Bridget's voice broke the quiet. They ran down the hill and found the children pointing up at the sky. Look! Margaret looked up and saw dozens of shooting stars. Make a wish, Ma, Patrick yelled. Margaret closed her eyes. She thought of Daniel, of their lost farm, and of her 9 children, who were now safe and happy. She thought of Nate, who had given them a home. She opened her eyes and smiled. I do not need to make a wish. Nate Callahan wrapped his arm around Margaret, pulling her close as their children gathered around them. She finally knew the truth. Home was never about a house or a piece of land. It was about this love, this family she had fought tooth and nail for. She had come to Montana just trying to survive, but she found so much more than that. Summer settled onto the ranch, warm and full of promise. Margaret watched from the porch as her children spread out across the yard. Tommy was in the corral with a young horse, and Bridget was grinning ear to ear on a pony, her little legs hardly reaching the stirrups. Mama, watch me, she yelled. I see you, sweetheart, Margaret called back, her heart full. Nate led the pony in slow, careful circles, his eyes fixed on their daughter. All 9 of them were his children now. Adelaide came and stood beside Margaret, handing her a cup of coffee. You look happy, she said. Margaret smiled. I am. It still takes me by surprise sometimes. It shouldn't, Adelaide said, her voice firm. You've earned this more than anyone I know. You went through fire and came back with your children, your faith, and your dignity. If that does not earn a little happiness, then nothing does. Margaret watched her family, living a life she had only dared to dream about. Thank you, Adelaide, for all you did for us. I did not do a thing, Adelaide replied. You are the one who did everything. You took us in when you had every reason not to. Margaret's voice broke. You stood by us. You became our family. Adelaide's eyes grew misty. That is because you are by your family. You, those kids and that stubborn man down there. You are all I have left in this world, and I will be damned if I let anything happen to you. The 2 women stood there, 2 survivors who had found something worth fighting for. Ma, Tommy shouted from the corral, waving her over. Come look, the stallion is finally letting me ride him. I'm coming, she answered, handing her cup to Adelaide and walking toward her firstborn son. Look at him, Ma, Tommy said, his face shining with pride. 3 months ago, he would not let a soul get near him. Now he is as gentle as can be. You did good work, son. Mr. Callahan, Pa, he taught me, Tommy corrected himself, a slight blush on his cheeks. He says broken things just need some patience and kindness. He told me that goes for horses and for people too. Margaret's heart felt like it would burst. He is a very wise man, your Pa. Yeah, Tommy said softly. He is. Margaret put an arm around her son. Are we going to be okay now, Ma? Really okay? She thought of everything they had overcome, all the hardship and the fear. Yes, baby, she said. We are going to be okay. That night, Margaret sat at the quiet kitchen table and wrote a letter. Dear Daniel, she started, it has been a year since I lost you. A year I thought would surely break me. But I did not break. I found someone, Daniel, a good and kind man who loves our children as if they were his own. I know you would have wanted that for us. I miss you every single day. That will never, ever change. But I have learned that grief and love can live inside the same heart. Moving forward does not mean I am forgetting you. The children are doing so well. Tommy is becoming a man you would be so proud of. And Bridget, oh Daniel, Bridget is pure sunshine. She does not remember you, but she has your smile. I am happy now. For the first time since you have been gone, I can say that and not feel guilty. I hope you are at peace. I will love you forever. You were my first home, but my heart has made room for a new one. All my love, Maggie. She folded the letter and placed it in the small chapel. It was a place for 2 people who had died too soon, but whose legacies were alive in this family built from loss. Standing in the moonlight, she knew every tear and every fear had been worth it. Love was not something you find only once in a lifetime. Love was something you build, day by day, choice by choice. She had built it once with Daniel in a small Kentucky farmhouse. She was building it all over again with Nate on a ranch in Montana. She would keep on building it for the rest of her days. That is what mothers do. That is what survivors do. We made it, she whispered to the stars, for Daniel and for everyone they had lost along the way. Then she went back inside her home, and closed the door on the night. She looked in on her 9 sleeping children, her legacy, her entire world. In the morning when the sun came up over the mountains, Margaret Sullivan Callahan would rise with it. She was ready to face the day, ready to fight for what mattered, and ready to truly live. She had come to Montana with 9 children, 11 cents, and one last hope. But she had found something so much better than hope. She had found herself.